Hello, so my name is Taylor and I'm the engineering event assistant for UBC Engineering. And so I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us today. And so welcome to the session, and we're going to be discussing some learning strategies and also just what to expect with courses returning to person. And so please feel free to comment any questions you have in the chat so that we can answer them. And also today I have two current engineering students with me. I have Kendra and Rachel. And so they're both going to be sharing their advice and also their experiences. And so I'm just going to let them introduce themselves. And so, Kendra, do you want to start with a little introduction?
Sure. Thanks, Taylor. So as Taylor said, my name is Kendra. I am going into third year chemical and biological engineering at UBC Vancouver, focusing more on the bio side. Not that it makes too much of a difference at this point in my degree, but that's a little piece about me. Yeah, excited to answer your guys' questions. So look forward to seeing what you have to ask for sure. And I'll pass it up to Rachel.
All right, thank you. So I'm Rachel. I am currently in my second year of engineering physics. I'm just finishing up school for the summer. And then in September, I'll be going into my third year. And also, very excited to be here and answer all of your questions. I think that's pretty much about it for me in terms of school. So I will let you know more as this goes on.
And so, thank you so much to you guys for joining me today. And so, I've been getting a lot of questions basically asking how we can be successful in like the school year. And so, I think that your guys' insight with giving students a better idea of what it's going to look like is going to be super helpful. And so, I'll start off by asking that now that classes are going back in person, what are you guys looking forward to the most? And so, Rachel.
All right, I guess I'll go first then. I think I am for sure most excited to meet my classmates again. I had first year in person, so I was very grateful for that. But all of my second year, including right now, is still online. And for me personally, I'm a very social studier, so I like to be around people for school. I feel to talk to people, work with people. And I think for a lot of people, Zoom kind of university has really disrupted that. So I'm very excited to be able to actually meet my classmates again. Also, the campus is beautiful and amazing, and I'm so happy to be back there. Um, and just kind of returning to that classic university experience, I think a lot of people look forward to, because I would say probably a year ago, no one would have predicted where we are now. So I think, most of all, I'm just excited to kind of make those connections again, because for me, university is so much more than just the classes. It's also about who you meet, kind of the time that you're there and those memories that you make. So I think, I'm definitely most excited to kind of meet my faculty and the people and everyone else coming onto campus for the first time. So, yeah.
I agree pretty much with it, whatever everything that Rachel said. I'm really excited to get back to campus to meet people that I met in second year that I did not know in first year. I've got lots more friends now throughout online school that I'm excited to meet for the first time in person on campus, which is going to be pretty cool. I'm excited to meet my professors as well because, obviously they were online just like the rest of us. So be able to say, "Hi, I was in your class. Thanks for teaching me. You did a great job. I learned lots," or I don't know, something like that. Additionally, I'm looking forward to being able to find study spots outside of my bedroom, which that was my major place I was in through online school in my room. It's nice to like, I would like to be out and about. I look forward to being able to walk to class, just get outside, get to do things with people over the weekend. You're not by yourself all the time. Where I'm from an extremely really tiny town, and I had no friends within like a large kilometer radius. So it's nice. I'm excited to be back in the typical university experience as Rachel mentioned.
Yeah, I definitely agree with like the both of you. I can't wait for classes to be in person. And so a lot of people think that engineering and like the course load can be super hectic. And so I'm just kind of curious to see like what strategies do you guys use to like plan and like organize your day? And then also just like what works the best for you guys. And Kendra, if you want to go ahead with that.
Sure. I'm actually I would say I'm in the middle between the typical go with the flow and heavy scheduler kind of person. I'm kind of in the middle. I write myself, even now, kind of daily to-do lists. I can't plan for more than like a couple of days. It doesn't work like that for me. Typically what happens is like, I should phrase this differently. I prefer the daily to-do list because then I can pick when I feel like I'm ready to to attempt like to work on certain subjects. So it gives me a bit of freedom to kind of move around my schedule that way, but it's still a way for me to track to make sure I'm getting everything done that I need to. And if I find that I'm having to carry over a lot of items multiple days on to-do list, then it kind of tells me I should probably get that done, or maybe I'm falling behind in that subject. So that's my way around things. I've just started using a calendar app so I can kind of visually see where things are and judge my time accordingly. That might be helpful for you if you find that you are more of a scheduling type of person, or you have design teams or volunteer or multiple. If you're in engineering, you're going to have multiple classes to deal with. So it's easy. It's a nice visual tool, I find. And then you can set reminders and whatever, depending on the level to which you want to schedule your life while you're in university. Did I touch on all the questions, Taylor, or was there something about studying or?
Answer them all.
Okay, awesome. Thanks. Okay, Rachel, go ahead.
Sure. Okay, I'll go. Yeah, very similar. I was always a planner type of person, so I never used really any online resources, but I know a lot of people use like online checklists and like calendars and stuff like that to track their workload. I personally just kind of had like the paper planner, and I'd always do my little checklists so I could check them off. And then also for midterms, I would always write those in the day that I got the date, so I knew ahead of time kind of how to plan for those, because some weeks you'll have 3 or 4 midterms, and so kind of knowing when those weeks would hit and being able to plan accordingly was really helpful. I think also just in terms of being a productive student in general, was also, of course, planning ahead and doing my work to the best that I could, but also knowing when to take breaks. So, having nights off and kind of allowing myself to recharge was really important. Because sometimes working all night to finish one assignment isn't as good as if you just get the sleep and then you're more productive the next day. So sometimes I wouldn't even check off all the things that I had on like my daily checklist, but it's more just like a guide of kind of what I needed to get done, but also making sure I took the time also for myself to take breaks, I think was really important for my first year and actually every year since then. So yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think one of the really great learning strategies you can have is just making sure that you're eating right and also making sure that you're getting enough sleep. And so, Rachel, you also talked about that you had classes now in your first year in person, and then in your second year, you had them online. And so, just what are some of the key differences you think there are between like online learning versus like learning in person? And also, how do you think you're going to kind of like adjust your learning strategies now that fall is going to be in person again?
Okay, that's a very interesting question. So obviously Zoom University is very different to in-person university. Um, I mean, I've been at UBC now for 2 years almost, and I've only written one set of finals in person. All the rest of mine have been online. So it's been very different in the sense of kind of what I mentioned earlier. It's a lot more isolating. I know some people kind of like the versatility of Zoom University because you can watch your lectures at any point, you can watch them wherever. And I guess that is kind of one of the benefits is that you don't have to physically be on campus. Um, but yeah, one thing I do love about in-person school is being able to work with people, being able to actually meet your professors, kind of feeling more connected to the content that you're learning. Because I think sometimes there's that dissociation of, I'm just watching these lectures on my laptop in my bed. Like it doesn't really mean anything. You could be anywhere. You don't really feel like a student. And so I think one big thing with being on campus is you really feel, a part of UBC and you feel like a student. And I think it's just so much easier to be engaged in the material when sitting in a lecture hall. And I guess how I'm gonna have to transition to that. Honestly, I sometimes I'm a little bit worried myself too. I mean, all of my midterms and my finals since then have basically been open book, which is obviously very different than the usual midterms and finals, which are closed book. So just completely different learning strategies for those. And I do think it'll be a bit of an adjustment. Um, but I think kind of just trying it out and getting back into it. And I think quickly, a lot of people will be like, thank God Zoom University is over. And just focus more on kind of building those connections with people, being back on campus, and really making sure that you're kind of loving the content that you're learning again. So yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely a really good answer. Thank you. And so, Kendra, a lot of people have concerns about like staying motivated throughout the term. And so I was just kind of curious, like, what are some strategies and like how do you yourself stay motivated?
So motivated in person, I'm thinking this is where we're headed. Yeah. I would say motivation is different for it comes from a different place for every person. Some people are more used to working by themselves and they find that's really productive and they can keep themselves motivated just with the material in front of them. Some people get motivation when they're with other people. It just depends on each person. I would say that it's probably helpful to have a good balance of social interaction, whether or not that's outside of the classroom or inside the classroom or outside of your engineering homework or while you're doing your engineering homework, and also time for yourself. So that's a bit of a it's a bit of a balance to help you kind of like stay motivated, and also to assess where you are with your knowledge as well, and kind of to judge that a little bit. So it's got a couple of kind of side benefits there. Other than that, I would definitely say like it keeps you motivated if you're able to, and I say able because some people don't find the time to fit this in your schedules. I was one of those people, but able to find time to partake in extracurriculars. So whether that's volunteer, design team, some sort of something you're doing on the side, just to take your mind out of the book study mentality. And then once you come back to it, it's easier to reassess and solve problems maybe you weren't able to do before. So it's just a bit of a brain break. That helps to make studying sustainable long term, helps you to keep motivated, I would say long term. I think there's that as well. But if you're unable to find time to commit to something else other than your 6 or maybe 7 courses, however many you're taking per term, then there are other ways for sure. Just putting in class, attending tutorials. I found tutorials super duper helpful in person, and even online, particularly in person. It's great because you work with other people and bounce ideas off of each other, and that I find is very motivating. Yeah. So.
Yeah, that's a really good answer. Thank you. And so there's some questions in the chat. And again, everyone is encouraged to like ask any questions you guys might have. And so Anish asked, how do you study for different classes like coding versus chemistry versus math? And that's a really great question because in your first year, you are going to be taking classes like chemistry, math, and coding. And sometimes the learning strategies can be really different. And so Rachel, just because you're also an Eng Phys and taking such a wide variety of courses right now, like how do you kind of change up your learning strategies depending on the class?
Yeah, okay. That is a good question. I think inherently everyone's automatically just going to study differently regardless. So I knew people who were really big into like cue cards or like rewriting all their notes, some people who just like doing problems, some people who like studying alone and with people. And so I think even before you like distinguish between classes, it's really important to learn how you study best in general. So like I said, I know that I don't study well alone. And so I have to proactively try to study with people or I won't study as well. So I think figuring that out first is a really important step in being able to study in the most efficient way possible. And then once you get down to kind of the class level, I mean, each class will be different. So if it's a chem class, for example, and there's more memorization, then something like cue cards might be more efficient, or writing notes versus a math class. If there's not a lot of memorization, then just doing practice problems. For me, with my courses that I took, kind of for the different courses like coding and then maybe more like a mechanical course or an electrical course, I found doing practice problems often really helped because sometimes memorization would be tricky for me because it would seem to like just overlap a lot of topics. So just doing problems that are actually specific to the course and really just doing the things that will show up on exams, I think was really helpful for me. Um, and once again, also finding people in my class who I could work with was really nice. And then also seeking resources for those classes. So different classes will have different resources. So for some of the physics classes, you'll have like Mastering Engineering, which is a website which will have practice problems sometimes, or like your chemistry class in first year will have a chem book and stuff like that. So there'll also be different resources for different classes. And teachers will give out practice midterms and practice finals. So you can also go to there and those will be specific to the course as well, which I think can just kind of help narrow what you need to know instead of it being so broad because it can sometimes seem like a lot. But then once you actually kind of take the time to do the practice problems and study, it's not as bad. So yeah, that's it.
Thank you. And so also, Kendra, there's another question in the chat. And so it's kind of asking, how do you alternate studying between different courses, homework, and when do you start studying for exams? And also there's, if you could give a brief rundown, I feel like I could give a brief rundown. So there's also a difference in your classes between studying for tutorials, and then you also have labs, and then you also have your classes. And so kind of one of the great things about first year is that you have labs where you're kind of dealing with practice problems, and then you're having tutorials where you're with like TAs to kind of like understand the material a lot more. But yeah, Kendra, if you could kind of talk about how you alternate studying between your different courses, and also like when do you start studying for exams, that'd be really great.
Sure. Just give me one moment. I'm just gonna close my door because I think it's gonna get a little bit loud. Sorry, apologies. Okay. The alternation between different courses, again, is dependent on the person. Some people are, I know myself, it's hard for me to flip-flop between courses, particularly studying. If I'm actually studying for an exam, I find it's helpful if I actually sit down and work on one subject for quite a while. That might be a bit of a drain on some people's like brain. Honestly, it drains me sometimes depending on the subject of course I'm studying. But I find excuse me, that it's like helpful to study one subject and then actually take a break before going on to a different subject, just to kind of divide them up a little bit. Perfect question again. Studying for exams is, again, kind of a personal thing. I would say that if there's a bit of an expectation coming in from high school, especially that you'll have a lot more time. You'll have the same amount of time, roughly, to study for exams in university as you did in high school. In high school, I think people will study for like a couple weeks in advance or something. Sometimes that's not always feasible in university, particularly if professors want to teach all the way up into the very end. Some professors will teach up until the weekend before, depending on what happens throughout the year. In my first year, actually, we had a snow day. And that was the day where all classes were canceled due to problems with like the bus schedule and students that couldn't commute to campus, which is completely understandable. They couldn't actually get to class, they can't learn. So the days like that take a chunk, just take a chunk out of the timeline for professors, and they have to play catch up for the rest of the term. Sometimes that can push the course a little bit later into the year, and you don't have as much time to study for exams as you might have anticipated. So just being flexible with that, I suppose, and kind of learning your subject throughout the year with the knowledge that you're going to be tested on at the end of the year. So not allowing things just to slip throughout the year, reviewing previous material constantly, maybe practicing problems for exams that you tried early on in the year, just to keep that knowledge fresh in your head. You'll find that actually, I found this coming into university, that you actually almost, I would say this personally because this is just my experience, but I needed less time to study for exams in university than I did in high school. And that's just because the school year in university is shorter than your typical high school year. In my high school, I went September to June, end of June, and now you're going September to April. So it cuts off a month from each term. And just naturally, you're going to retain more information if you learned it like more recently, and that's kind of what happens in university. So I would say some people have to study for an exam a couple days before the exam actually happens. Some people are able to find a week or two to find beforehand. So just that would be a good example of kind of really thinking your schedule through and being able to wedge in sections where you're going to try to review things, because it's easy to forget to do that if you're bogged down with last minute course materials in classes.
Yeah, that's a really great answer. Thanks. And so also some people are kind of asking me to clarify a bit more on like tutorials and labs. And so I'll kind of explain that a bit better. So in your first year, you can take classes like, say, like coding, which is AppSci 160. And so for that class, you would have a lab for it where you're basically being given a problem, and then you're also graded in that lab to kind of apply what you were learning in the courses and so in like the lectures. And so other times you'll be also in like a class like Physics 170, which is like a mechanics class where you would have a tutorial, which is more like working alongside your TA to kind of understand how to do problems from the classes. And so labs are typically you're being graded on. In tutorials, it's more so being graded for participation, because with tutorials, they're really trying to help you foster an understanding of what you're learning in the lectures, versus labs is more like you applying it independently. And so another question someone asked is, did the pressure of getting into your preferred specialization ever get overwhelming? And so I heard some of the specializations like mech are very competitive. And so we also have a virtual session that's posted that talk more about specializations. But Rachel, you're in a very competitive specialization, and so I was just wondering, like, how were you able to deal with that pressure in your first year?
Okay, yeah. So I was definitely stressed first year. I cannot lie because I remember thinking like, oh, if I don't get in, that'll be really scary. Like, what if my grades aren't good enough? All that. But at the end of the day, first of all, you can only do it as hard as you try. So try your best in first year, and whatever grades you get, you can't blame yourself because you worked hard for those grades, and so never fault yourself for that. Um, and then on top of that, let's say for some reason something happened and maybe your grades aren't where you want them to be. And then at the end of the year, you think, oh, I don't know if I can get into my specialty that I want. That is totally okay. I know people who have gone into different faculties and then transferred. I know people who have gone into faculties that they've wanted and then decided they don't want to be there anymore. So it's definitely something that I think was on my mind first year. But I think looking back now, I shouldn't have let it affect me as much as it did. Just kind of make the most of your first year. Try as hard as you can, and do the best that you can do. But at the end of the day, if you do get into, let's say you want to go into mech and you get into mechanical engineering, you might decide in a year you don't even want to be there. And if for some reason maybe you can't get into mech that year, then I know people who have gone into iGen and then they transfer out or they go into another faculty. So for example, one of my peers in EngPhys this year, she um, for many reasons, decided to go into iGen instead of EngPhys, and got ahead on a whole bunch of courses. And then she transferred into EngPhys and now has a way lighter course load. So in a lot of ways, it's not even detrimental in any way to like your degree or your performance to not get into the specialization that you want right away. That being said, I'm sure many people are very capable of getting into their specialization. And while they are competitive, kind of like I just said, try your best. And at the end of the day, it will all work out. And there's many paths that you can take to graduation. So yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good answer. Thanks. And so, if anyone has any like last minute questions, definitely ask them in the chat. But just before we wrap up, I'd like to ask you guys, if you guys were in grade 12 and about to start the year, like some of our incoming students are, just like what advice would you give them? And Kendra, why don't you start?
So I missed the last part.
If you were, in grade 12, ready to start your first year of engineering at UBC, what advice would you give yourself?
Oh, what I would probably say to myself is, and this actually kind of ties into the question just asked about the pressure of going into your discipline. I would say that what's kind of important at the end of the day is like learning for the sake of learning and not learning to achieve like a grade or anything. Because when it kind of comes down to it, everyone's going to graduate with the same degree like in your faculty. And what's important from that point forward, of course, is that you're able to get a job. And you grades are one thing, and that's what the employer is going to see in your transcript. But it's also important that you're able to communicate what you've learned through an interview and being able to use that knowledge and be able to not only have the knowledge of here, but be able to translate it into a form that's like usable in a workplace. So I'd say learning for the sake of learning. So making sure that what you're learning, you understand, you can apply, that you feel yourself, that you know very well, and that your knowledge transcends the questions they could possibly ask you on an exam. So I think just having that knowledge kind of takes the stress off your shoulders that you have to achieve a specific grade, when really it's more important that you're learning the material so you feel like you're comfortable with it, and then you could use it in the future and you could use it for a job. I'd probably tell myself that.
Okay, yeah, I can answer that next. I think very similar to that, I would say kind of make the most of your university experience because you're only going to be first years once. And I, to this day, still have so many memories from my first year and all the fun that I had. And so I think it is really important to, yeah, love what you're learning and really appreciate it. But also just take the time to kind of appreciate your life and this new experience and all the people that you're meeting, and to also allow yourself to have fun and take nights off and not study every single night, because that's also a part of the university experience. And honestly, those are some of the best memories that I had first year. So yeah, I think to kind of summarize, um, definitely, try hard in school and yeah, try to best as you can really learn the classes and take away as much as you can from them, but also make sure to just have time for yourself. Because like I said, if I could go back and relive some of my first year experiences, I definitely would. It was probably a highlight of like my life so far. So make sure to take the time to appreciate those. Yeah, I think that's it.
Thank you guys so much for coming and answering all the questions I had for you guys. And also just thank you to everyone who attended, and hopefully that gave you more insight onto some of the learning strategies you can use at UBC Engineering. And so that is all I have. And so I hope you guys have a good night, and thank you again so much for joining.